أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم وهب لنا رأفته ورحمته وعونه ودعاءه وخيره ورضاه، ما ننال به سعة من رحمتك وفوزا عندك يا كريم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We said that when you examine the state of affairs of the Islamic world, what you find is complete disarray. You observe savagery and barbarity, mercilessness on a global scale, chaos and mayhem. These are words that, if we were to be honest with ourselves, they would summarize the situation in the Islamic world. And it doesn't matter which aspect of the life of the Muslim nation you are looking at, whether it's the political situation or the economic landscape, regardless, social, moral, whichever direction you look, that is what you find: hopelessness, despair, conflict, war, bloodshed, endless conflicts. And so, of course, those who care will try to fix things. But ultimately, what they do is what I like to refer to as sloppy patch-up jobs. Imagine if you had, or if somebody had liver disease, and one of the signs of liver disease is that you have excess acne on your face. Imagine if this person went to the doctor, and instead of running the necessary blood tests to diagnose the problem in the liver, the doctor simply dismisses all of that and says, here's a Band-Aid, put it on your face so that you could cover the acne. Well, you haven't solved the problem now, have you? Patch-up jobs are plentiful in the Muslim world. They'll be talking about replacing one leader with another. Or they'll say that we might need constitutional reforms. They engage in election campaigns. The reason they're called campaigns is because it's a battle, it's a war for power. And so they will enter into these costly, sometimes bloody campaigns on who gets to rule, who gets to lead, who gets to fix the problems, the endemic, deep-seated issues that we suffer from. But ultimately, they're all patch-up jobs. They're Band-Aids. Imagine if in your house you had a major water leak in your roof, which leads to a mold infestation, and all you do is replace the wallpaper. You have not solved the problem. And we said that some of the Muslim academics anthropologists, social scientists, historians, and others, they've tried to pin the problem on Yazid, which is literally the easiest thing you can do, because remember, Yazid was the epitome of vice and immorality. There's nothing you can say about him that would be in excess or undeserved. You can literally say anything, and Yazid has done it. Think of any sin, and he's already beat everyone else to it. So it's an easy fix. It's a band-aid job to pin the problem squarely and exclusively on Yazid. Some who are a little more brave, they might have gone as far back as Muawiyah. After all, who established dynastic rule? Who was the one who set the stage for Yazid to rule? And for hereditary succession to begin, it was Muawiyah. And so some of the bravest of those who I would characterize as brothers of Talha and Zubayr have gone as far as to say, well, maybe it was Muawiyah. But ultimately, that will never address the problem. It will never heal those wounds. It will never cure the endemic diseases that we are suffering from in the Muslim world, because it fails to properly diagnose the problem. When you don't diagnose the disease, how are you going to fix it? Which is why the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt stress this point, that the problem did not begin with Yazid. Yazid, as we said, was the rotten organic fruit of this tree, one of hundreds of rotten fruits. When you see a tree like that, you don't go after the fruit. You forget about the branch or the stem. You have to examine the roots. Which is why I mentioned the story of Kumayt ibn Zayd. And this was something that the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam were emphatic about. They would encourage these poets to recite the tragedies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Obviously, as a poet, you have creative license. You're able to describe the tragedy in a way that would be both impressionable, effective, memorable. And so the Imams would encourage them. In the case of Kumayt, we have multiple narrations. One hadith I cited last night where the Imam prayed for him, Allahumma ighfir lil Kumayt. In another hadith, Di'b al-Khuza'i comes to Imam Rida alayhi salam, narrates and recites that famous poem. When he finishes, the Imam says, آمنك الله يوم الفزع الأكبر. May Allah give you safety and security on the day of terror, the day of judgment. May you be protected from all of that. Then the Imam took his shirt and he handed it over to Di'bal as a gift, and he said to him, I have performed prayers all night long for 1,000 nights while wearing this shirt. This is my gift to you. Imagine the Imams would not only encourage this, but can you picture a poet sitting on the pulpit in the presence of the infallible, inerrant Imam, saying these things, and the Imams would encourage them, pray for them? In other words, this is part and parcel of our faith, brothers and sisters. As I said, bara'ah is the cornerstone, and I'll explain this further tonight. I'll explore this concept a little bit more, inshaAllah. But bara'ah and disassociation and hatred towards the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt is a cornerstone of our faith. Of course, when it comes to broadcasting and speaking publicly about these things, there are etiquettes, there are rules, there are regulations. There are jurisprudential matters that have to be taken into account. You need to listen to the scholars, to the jurists, to the fuqaha, to the maraja'. They're the ones who draw the boundaries around these things. There is an element of expertise required, and I talked about this last year in a majlis in this same city, where I said that not everyone has the capability to engage in polemical debates with followers of other sects. Who told you that you're qualified to do this? Who gave you the credentials? Who gave you the permit to do this? There are experts in this field just like there are experts in every other discipline. Just because I've learned a couple of ahadith and I've read a few books doesn't qualify me to engage in these polemical debates, which can be detrimental, they can be dangerous, and we're seeing that. We're seeing how people engage in these debates without having the proper qualifications or the backing of the scholars and the supervision of the ulama. They end up going astray, or they end up doing a disservice to our faith, or they end up causing bloodshed in the Shia faith. And so there are rules and regulations. But the principle of tabarri is a cornerstone in our religion. The Imams would encourage them. In one hadith, again going back to Kuwait, I referred to him last night. He says that the part which actually moves the Imam and inspires him and makes him pray for Kuwait is where he says, يُصِيبُ بِهِ الرَّامُونَ عَنْ قَوْسِ غَيْرِهِمْ فَيَا آخِرًا أَسْدَى لَهُ الْغَيَّ أَوَّلُ. He says, when they pointed the arrow towards the blessed eye of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Yes, the one shooting the arrow was a person who was present on the plains of Karbala, but in fact, this qaws, this bow, was in the hands of somebody else. It was the awwal who shot the arrow. Even though the one aiming it in that direction was someone on the plains of Karbala. يصيب به الرامون عن قوس غيرهم فَيَا آخِرًا أَسْدَى لَهُ الْغَيِّ. This last person was only the last ring in the chain. أَسْدَى لَهُ الْغَيِّ, meaning the oppression was handed to him by أَوَّلُ, by number one. Which is why Al-Gharawi al-Asfahani says in his famous poem as well, وَمَا رَمَاهُ إِذْ رَمَاهُ حَرْمَلَهُ وَإِنَّمَا رَمَاهُ مَنْ مَهَّدَ لَهُ. It wasn't Harmalah who cut the neck of the infant of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein from the jugular vein to the jugular vein. It was the one who paved the way for him. Yazid was this organic rotten fruit. He was the product of a culture that gave rise to a phenomenon called Yazid. It was a culture, a protocol, orchestrated by countless religious scholars giving edicts, and prepared for by a complex political establishment. It was the likes of Abdullah ibn Umar and others who theorized and paved the way for this phenomenon to appear. Abdullah ibn Umar, in the life before Imam al-Hussein, before the massacre of Karbala, you've all heard that Imam al-Hussein invited him to come and to support his cause. And he said, Ya Abu Abdullah, it's too soon for you to die. This beautiful skin of yours was kissed by Rasulullah. I would hate to see it being wounded. I would hate to see you die. Don't do this. In other words, he insinuated to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein that you're being deceived, you're being fooled. You're the grandson of Rasulullah. You can live on this earth in honor and dignity, and you can have everybody's love and affection and respect. Don't do something for the sake of the dunya so that you could be Khalifa for a few days and end up losing everything. He insinuated these things in his conversations with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He didn't openly come out and say that you're doing this for the sake of the dunya, but there were innuendos, if you read between the lines. But then after the massacre of Ashura, he said it openly. Do you know what he said? This is in Sahih Bukhari. Abdullah ibn Umar comes out and says that I don't see any sin greater than what? Than breaking the pledge of allegiance with the Khalifa who extracted that pledge based on the Sunnah of Rasulullah. And anyone who does this will be exposed and humiliated on the day of Ashura. In a clear reference to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. In other words, the greatest crime isn't killing Hussein. the flesh of Rasulullah. The greatest crime is the fact that Hussein refused to pay his pledge of allegiance to Yazid. It was this religious elite that theorized and legitimized and validated and approved and established a culture that gave rise to the filth that was Yazid. It didn't happen spontaneously, as we said. It's not that they suddenly got angry on the day of Ashura and became hysterical and didn't know what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. Back to Kuwait. One day, this is in the blessed book of Al-Kafi. One day Kuwait comes to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. He says to him, he recites poetry for him as well. The Imam then said to him, may Allah bless you, O Kuwait. Had we had money, I would have offered it to you. Meaning all of our money has been confiscated. They've taken everything from us. In another hadith, the Imam actually says to his women and children, if you have any jewelry, anything, take it off. Let me give it to Kuwait. In other words, I can give you whatever I have. It still wouldn't be worth this one line of poetry of yours. Allahu Akbar. In this hadith, the Imam says to him, I wish I had something to give you, but I don't. But I will say one thing to you, which is what Rasulullah said to Hassan ibn Thabit, who said to him, لا زال معك روح القدس ما دمت عنا ذابة. The Holy Spirit stands with you as long as you continue to defend us and honor us with your words. Then Kuwait says, I asked Imam al-Baqir about the two. The Imam said, the hadith describes the scene like this. فَأَخَذَ بِوِسَادَةٍ فَكَسَرَهَا فِي صَدْرِهِ. You know, when someone's heartbroken, when someone remembers something, Imam al-Baqir took the pillow and he squeezed it on his chest. And then he said, Wallahi ya Kuwait, ma uhriqat mihjamatun min dam. No blood has ever been spilled the size of a small cup used for blood cupping. Have you seen those cups? The Imam says, no blood, even to that extent, has ever been spilled. Listen carefully. ما أحرقت محجمة من دم ولا أخذ مال عن غير أو من غير حل ولا رفع حجر عن حجر إلا وذلك في أعناقهما. He says every single crime, every drop of blood, every money that was usurped, and every stone that was turned is on their necks. And then you have an imbecile who runs a hawza, who says to you, we have to balance the good with the bad. We have to see, we have to be honest and objective and look at their contributions to Islam. We have to look at the Umayyads' contributions to Islam, Bani al-Abbas's contributions to Islam. And a person like this runs a hawza. The graduates of this hawza get to sit on the pulpit of Rasulullah. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam says every drop of blood is on their necks. From the beginning of time to the end of days. These things are a cornerstone. Why? I want you to listen very carefully. This is a central concept, brothers and sisters. Inshallah, I won't take too much of your time. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says in a hadith, لكل شيء أساس وأساس الإسلام حبنا أهل البيت. Everything has a foundation. And the foundation of Islam, not the branches, not the fruits, not the auxiliary things, the benefits, no. The very infrastructure on which Islam is positioned is what? The love to us, the Ahlul Bayt. That's one hadith. The next hadith is a man by the name, it's about a man named Ziyad al-Aswad. This hadith is mentioned in Tafsir al-Ayyashi, it's mentioned in Rijal al-Najashi and others. Ziyad is a man from Khurasan. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was in Mecca, or in Mina rather, in his fustat, meaning in his tent. Ziyad sets out from Khurasan all the way to Hijaz. When he arrives and enters into the tent of Imam al-Baqir, the hadith describes him as having feet that are so swollen and bloody, full of blisters, that the Imam immediately says to him, "What's happened to you?" He says to him, "Ya ibn Rasulullah, I came all the way from Khurasan so that I could come and meet you. And I tried to walk as much on my feet, on my bare feet. Why? لأني رجل مثقل بالآثام. I'm a sinful man. And so I kept walking on my feet. And every time I felt tired, I felt exhausted, I felt I was in pain." Those of you who have walked from Najaf to Karbala in Arba'een, may Allah bless you. And those who haven't, may Allah grant them the honor of doing so. You know how hard it is. Now imagine Khurasan to Hijaz. It's about 2 months, 3 months worth of walking. Every time I felt exhausted, I would be inspired بِحُبِّكُمْ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ. I would remind myself that I'm doing this for the love of Al Muhammad salawatullahi alayhim ajma'een. Allahumma salli. So the Imam responds to him by saying, أَلَيْسَ الدِّينُ إِلَّا الْحُبِّ. Is religion anything other than that? Religion is nothing but love. Nothing but love. In another version of the hadith, the Imam adds another word. أَلَيْسَ الدِّينُ إِلَّا الْحُبُّ وَالْبُغْضِ. Is religion anything other than love and hatred? Now, even if this last part wasn't in the hadith, even though it is, but even if it wasn't, it's a natural extension of it. When you love somebody, you disassociate and hate who? The person who is at the opposite side, right? If you love Musa, you automatically hate Fir'aun. I mean, that's how it works. You can't love both the good and the bad. أَلَيْسَ الدِّينُ إِلَّا الْحُبُّ وَالْبُغْضِ. Brothers and sisters, love and hatred. Love and hatred. These are the two things with which we recalibrate our behavior, our mindsets. In other words, our behavior is set by our love and hatred. People say our values, sure, but it's not just the values. If you go deeper into it, it's love and hatred. Let me explain how. He's a stingy man, miserly, doesn't like to spend money. When he goes out with his friends, he wants his friends to pay for his meal. He's the last person to put his hand in his pocket. But then he falls in love, gets engaged to a girl. Now all of a sudden, he's the most generous person. He sees a flower shop, pulls over, buys her a bouquet of flowers, even if it's expensive. Doesn't care, throws the card on the table, doesn't even ask for the price. He sees a jewelry shop, stops and buys her a ring. She wants to go on a trip, on a vacation. He makes the bookings quickly and takes her on that trip. What happened? What just happened? His love towards his fiancée has affected, rather it has upended and completely transformed his intrinsic behavior. Suddenly he's generous. What's changed is that now he's in love. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be doing this. You see what's happened? If, my dear brothers and sisters, if we lived in a society where our love and hatred were aligned to the right people. Let me open two parentheses here and say why it has to be people, because automatically a lot of people might think that we have to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why the Ahlul Bayt? And the reason is right there in the Quran. Surah Al-Hamd, Ummul Kitab. The most important chapter in the Quran. What do we say in it? Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Oh Allah, guide us to the straight path, right? That should be enough. Guide us to the straight path. Guide us to the path that leads us to you. If you want to be all God-centric about it, guide us to the path that leads us to you. But no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, sirat alladhina an'amta alayhim. The path of the ones whom you have blessed. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Not the ones that have the ire and wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent upon them, or the ones that have deviated. Suddenly Allah aligns our guidance to individuals, not to Him, but to people that have been blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and says that if you want to define or identify the path that isn't straight, you should avoid those that have received the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and avoid them. In other words, God Himself calibrates the path towards Him through these individuals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have easily said otherwise. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu attaqullah. Do you remember the verse? وَكُونُوا صَادِقِينَ. O you who believe in Allah, be pious and be righteous. Should be good enough. كُونُوا صَادِقِينَ. Allah doesn't say that. He says, وَكُونُوا مَعَ الصَّادِقِينَ. Be with the one who are truthful and righteous. Not that you should be truthful and righteous, because oftentimes you think you're being righteous. But how do you know? How do you determine whether you're being righteous? Whether what you're doing is right or wrong? You have to align it. You have to calibrate it. You have to set your actions against those who are truly righteous. Those who are infallible. Those who are inerrant. Those who are good and moral. And avoid those who are evil. So, when a society loves those who are righteous and follows them, what happens? What happens is complete bliss. There is no longer any hatred towards your fellow brothers and sisters. You begin to care for them. You begin to express compassion and affinity towards them. You actually care about them if they're in affliction, if they're poor, if they're oppressed, if they need your help. Why? Because now these are, everyone you see around you tonight is a person who yuwali awliya Allah. Someone who loves those loved by Allah. Let me give you an example. You go to a football stadium and you find somebody sitting next to you who's from a completely different ethnicity, completely different background, speaks a different language, but he happens to support the same bloody team. Now all of a sudden you feel this fraternity. You feel this bond with them. He starts to scream, you scream along with them. He starts to do the Mexican thing and you do the same thing. Why? Because there's a bond, there is a common ground that brings you together. It's a facade, it's worthless. It's all about a ball that gets kicked around, yes. But what you've done is you've created this fraternity, this brotherhood, this sorority. This is what Islam wants from us, brothers and sisters. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says, Allahumma salli. He says, أوثق عرى الإيمان الحب في الله والبغض في الله. The strongest rope of faith, the thickest, most enduring, most powerful basis for religion is when you love for the sake of Allah and you hate for the sake of Allah. In other words, you have no personal vendetta against this individual except that they do not align with these values, except that they exhibit enmity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's more than enough. I'm sorry, I want nothing to do with you. In fact, I have hatred towards you. I'm not going to extend my hand. I'm not going to hurt you or anything like this as long as you keep your distance. But I will never love you. Because love, la habiba illa hu, as we say in the dua of Imam al-Zaman, la habiba illa huwa wa ahluh. The only true beloved are Muhammad wa al Muhammad salawatullahi alayhi majma'in. Suddenly, morals begin to take shape. Values begin to produce their sweet nectar. When love and hatred is determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His vicegerents as the recipients of this love. قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا. I was speaking to someone, an Uber driver, and I said to him, where are you from? He said, from a certain country, I won't mention it. The reason I asked him is because I wanted him to ask me where I was from. He said, so where are you from? I said, I'm from a city called Karbala. Have you been to Karbala? Have you heard about Karbala? You know, you got to take your opportunity whenever it presents itself to do some tabligh. So I said to him, I come from Karbala. Have you heard about it? He said, yeah, maybe, you know. I said, well, do you know who's buried in Karbala? Abu Abdullah al-Husayn, Sibtu Rasulillah, Rayhanatun Nabi, Sayyidu Shababi Ahlil Jannah. Why don't you come visit one day? There were 26 million people who walked to Karbala this year. Have you not heard about all of this? So suddenly he realized that I wasn't just engaging in chit-chat. I was actually trying to proselytize. So he said, look, what I know is that we have to love Allah and follow Rasulullah. Hussein is not found in the Quran. I said, as a matter of fact, Hussein is mentioned in the Quran. He started to look at me from the rear view mirror with his eyes like this big. He said, what are you talking about? Hussein is not in the Quran. I said, Hussein is literally right there in the Quran. He said, you're lying. I said, be respectful. Ask me for the evidence. He said, where's your evidence? I said, doesn't Allah tell us, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Who are the qurba? If Hussein is not among the qurba, who is? Who is? Abdul Rahman ibn Auf? The wine seller? Who? Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah? Who was it? If it's not Hussein, then who? If this love is aligned properly, if the hatred is aligned properly, brothers and sisters, you will see a fraternity like no other. You will see people actually showing mercy to one another. How do you know the love is there? Well, if your heart flutters for the remembrance of Ali ibn Abi Talib, it means the love is there. At least the seeds are there. If you look forward to a majlis for Abu Abdullah al-Husayn, it means the love is there. Right? If your eye brightens up when you hear about the virtues of the Imams, the love is there. You need to nurture it. You need to develop it. You need to actually strengthen it so that it then begins to permeate through your organs and actually produce results in physical reality. That's when behavior begins to change. That's when people become generous. If we loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we wouldn't have a problem in giving khums to those who are poor, would we? The problem, the reason people do not do these things, they do not abide by religious values, is because they don't love Allah and His vicegerents. If they loved Allah as much as they loved their fiancé, we wouldn't have this problem. Subhanallah, this love that's between a husband and wife. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Even though Allah put it there, but ultimately, it's a love that stems from lust. It's a love of the flesh. It's very superficial. It's nothing like the love between Ali and Fatima, which is godly in the most pristine definition of the term. But still, it changes your behavior. The love should be nurtured so that it then begins to change your behavior for the better. تعصي الإله وأنت تظهر حبه. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, هذا لعمرك في الفعال بديع إن كان حبك صادقا لأطعته. You claim that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you're committing sins. You see a guy who smokes, but he doesn't smoke in front of his father because he loves him. He doesn't want to upset his father. He doesn't want to disrespect him. So he does it in secret. If we truly loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we wouldn't be committing sins, knowing that He observes us, knowing that He sees all. Ta'sil ilah wa anta tudhiru hubbahu. You say, you claim that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but what about all these sins? There seems to be a problem with the love. إن كان حبك صادقا لأطعته. If you truly loved Allah, you would have obeyed Him. Why? إن المحب لمن يحب مطيع. The one who loves another, cares for them, follows them, obeys them. Yes. So this love needs to be nurtured. الحب في الله والبغض في الله. The discussion is lengthy. We have dozens and dozens of ahadith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in a hadith narrated in Tafsir al-Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salatu wasalam, in which Allah says to Prophet Musa, He says to him, Ya Musa, what have you done for me? Musa says, Ilahi sallaytu lak, wa tasaddaqtu lak, wa dhakartuk. I've done all these things. I've prayed for you. I've given charity for your sake. Allah said to him, as for salat, فَإِنَّهَا لَكَ جُنَّةٌ فَإِنَّهَا burhan. Salat is it's a symbol of your faith. You didn't do this for me. This is a manifestation of your belief, which has manifested in reality. You're proving that you're a believer, you're a Muslim. As for sadaqah, فَإِنَّهَا ظِلٌّ وَجُنَّةٌ. When you give charity, this is like a cloud that protects you from the burning sun on the day of judgment. It'll give you protection. So you did this for yourself as well. All these things, the remembrance, all these things are for your own good. So Musa said, oh Allah, then what is it that for me to do it would be done in your name, in your way, for your sake? Allah said to him, هَلْ وَالَيْتَ لِي وَلِيًّا وَعَادَيْتَ لِي عَدُوًّا. Have you ever loved someone purely and squarely and exclusively for my sake? Because he is my wali and under my guardianship and my friend? And have you hated someone for no reason other than the fact that they are enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Once you do that, come and tell me I've done something for you. سلم لمن سالمكم حرب لمن حاربكم ولي لمن والاكم عدو لمن عاداكم. I don't care their contributions. I don't care who they are. I don't care what they've done. I don't care if they were the best to me personally. But if they classify as enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's how a Shia is. If you reach the level when your heart flutters for the remembrance of the Ahlul Bayt, it means you have love. If you reach a stage where your jugular vein swells from anger when you hear the tragedies of Fatima Zahra, it means you have that hatred which you're required to have. To get angry about it. Someone comes to Imam Rida alayhi salam, he says to him, tell me about those two. What are your views about them? Remember, Imam Rida is the heir to the throne. He's the crown prince. He has to choose his words carefully. But listen to what he says. He says, كانت لنا أم صالحة. We had a mother who was righteous. She was good. She was honorable. وهي ماتت وقد ماتت وهي عنهما ساخطة. And we all know that when she died, she was angry with them. وَلَمْ يَرِدْنَا بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ أَنَّهَا رَضِيَتْ عَنْهُمَا. And we never heard after that she became pleased with them. And this is something you can deduce from just two ahadith mentioned in Sahih Bukhari. That's all you need. She was a good woman. She was righteous. She died while she was angry with them. End of discussion. That's how I feel. as someone who considers Fatima Zahra to be his mother or her mother, my dear brothers and sisters, we should feel the same way. We can't be indifferent about the tragedies that befell her. We can't just turn an eye and say, well, it happened. It happened. We can, or we should forgive and forget. No. As I said, it's a cornerstone. It affects our behavior. And the fact that the tragedy of Fatima was neglected, swept under the carpet. Ibn Abi al-Hadid, you know what he says? Ibn Abi al-Hadid, whose son from the other camp, from the brothers of Talha and Zubayr, they say that he was a Shia. Why? Because he praises Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's it. Even though he was undoubtedly not a Shia. And this is just one more evidence. He says that I heard, because remember he lived in Baghdad, and Baghdad was a city with a mixed population. It had Shia, Sunni. And so he'd heard, he was contemporaneous with Sayyid ibn Tawus. There were giant Shia scholars at the time. So the views of the Shia were quite common. And he'd heard many things. Our scholars like Sheikh Al-Tusi and others, they would have Sunni students attend their classes. Most things were open. So Ibn Abi al-Hadith says that I heard that Fatima's house was ambushed and that they tried to burn it down. And I said to myself, surely that can't be right. That can't possibly happen. This is the daughter of Rasulullah. This is the blood and flesh of God's messenger. That can't be true. But it's a claim that's been made. So let's find out. He said, I set out to investigate the matter so that I could reach my own conclusion to know whether this was true. By the way, parenthetically, some have tried to whitewash the crimes against Fatima Zahra by delving into some of the details and saying, well, this particular detail, there is no evidence for it in Sahih Bukhari. As if Sahih Bukhari is some gospel that was revealed by God. And as if you dismiss one specific detail, you can completely dismiss the entire thing. That's a game they play. And I've talked at length about this in a documentary that was released last year. Fatima, Killing of an Angel. So, what they try to do is they tell you, well, we have no evidence about doing such and such to Fatima herself. Honestly, I can't speak of some of the things they did. We have no evidence for this. But one thing that has been established without a speck of doubt is that a threat was made. لَأُحْرِقَنَّ الدَّارَ عَلَيْكُمْ. This is something that's established. There's no question about it. It was established and made directly to Fatima Zahra from the second gypsy. The mere threat itself, the threat itself, is that something that can be easily dismissed? Imagine if someone said to their father that I will cut your throat with a knife. Is that something you can simply look over and say, oh, well, it was just a threat. You didn't actually do it. Can you say that? If someone threatens a random woman, just a normal human being, that I will burn down your house over your head and the head of your children, is that something we can just walk past and not worry about? Or is that not a crime in itself? Let alone this woman being Fatima, let alone her being pregnant, let alone in the house having Amirul Mu'mineen and Hassan and Hussein. So Ibn Abi al-Hadith says, I went, I investigated, I looked through the books, and sure enough, I realized that it's true. The threat was made, the fire was burnt, And God knows what else happened. However, he says, look, the conclusion I've reached is that إنها ليست من الكبائر. Yeah, killing Fatima was tragic. It shouldn't have happened. But it's not among the greater sins. If you look at the hadith corpus where Rasulullah mentions the greater sins, he talks about shirk, he talks about doing this and the other, but not killing Fatima Zahra per se. You see what happens? Love and hatred, brothers and sisters. When you establish this love, and this opens doors which I don't want to get into now. Imagine you nurture this love in your children and the hate as well. Then you can take any immorality. It's just one sentence. I want you to think about this later. Any immorality that you see out there on the streets, on TV, on social media, at school, elsewhere, you simply attach that to them. And you immediately create a repulsion towards that immoral act. That's one of the reasons why tabarri is so important. Because it affects behavior, it affects the way you think, the way you see things. كانت لنا أم صالحة وقد ماتت وهي عليهم ساخطة, said our eighth Imam. بأبي أنت وأمي يا مولاتي يا فاطمة. This tragedy is so great that people throughout history have found themselves perplexed with it. They've been confused. Is this possible? Could this have really happened? As I explained last night, of course it could have happened, because every single thing that happened had a precedence. Every single thing that happened in Karbala was preceded by something else. And there are many, many more examples which unfortunately we don't have time to cover. But the point is, if you read history, you'll see that these crimes were nothing new. Of course it's possible. And yet it was still shocking. قال سليم قلت يا سلمان. Salim ibn Qais al-Hilali comes back to Medina. Oh Salman, is it true? Is it true what the rumors are saying? Is it true that they burnt the house of Fatima? Imam al-Sadiq says Ali ibn Abi Talib did not come out until smoke had filled his house. Is it true that they had the audacity to do this? قال بلى وعزة الجبار ليس على الزهراء من خماري لكنها لاذت وراء الباب رعاية للستر والحجاب. Yes, O Sulaim, what you were told is true. They did attack the house. They ambushed it. Fatima, she was so close to the door, and the enemy was so close to it from the other side. He himself says to Muawiyah, I could hear her breaths. That's when I pushed it. That's when I kicked it. Fatima wanted to cover up. She didn't want to be seen by these treacherous enemies of God, by strange men. So she hid behind the door. But then in this door there was a nail. أو تدري ما صدر فاطمة ملبس المسمار ما حال ضلعها المكسور ما سقوط الجنين ما حمرة العين ما حال قرطها. When she came out of the masjid having delivered her sermon, أجرك الله يا صاحب العصر, she came out of the majlis. She had a piece of paper in her hand. After delivering the sermon, the Khalifa realized that he had nothing to say. He had no proof, no evidence. He was completely disrobed. And so he was forced to write a declaration saying that Fadak must be returned to its rightful owner, to Fatima. She said to him, put that in writing. He put it in writing. Fatima took that. She rolled it in her hand. I don't know if Imam al-Hassan was there with his mother, but the one who reports this incident is Zainab alayha salam. So she undoubtedly witnessed what was about to happen. Fatima comes out of the masjid, having realized that they will lose Fadak, they will forever be exposed. He sent his friend, he sent his aide to go after Fatima Zahra. I don't know how he approached Fatima, but can you imagine? On the night of estrangement, after the killing of Imam al-Hussein and all of the men, with the exception of Imam al-Sajjad, they came and they wrapped their hands with chains. Imagine when these men were approaching these women and children to tie their hands with chains. This is how he approached Fatima Zahra. He got so close so that he could grab the paper from her hand. I can't say what he did after that. Ya Sahib al-Amr, do forgive me. I will only cite what your grandfather Imam al-Sadiq said. He said that a moment after that, when Fatima refused to give him the paper, وَإِذَا بِقِرْطِهَا تَنَاثَرَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, her earrings scattered on the ground. رحم الله من نادى وفاطمته. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. I want you to say this dua. Say Ameen from the deepest recesses of your hearts. Inshallah, your eyes are tearful, your hearts are broken. إلهنا سيدنا مولانا عجل اللهم لوليك الفرج. اجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم وهب لنا رأفته ورحمته وعونه ودعاءه وخيره ورضاه. اللهم أرض إمام زماننا عنا. اللهم ارزقنا رؤيته. اللهم وفقنا لنصرته. اللهم ارزقنا في الدنيا زيارة فاطمة الزهراء ورسول الله. ارزقنا زيارة الحسين، وفي الآخرة شفاعة الحسين وأم الحسين يا رب العالمين. إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والمراجع والفقهاء والصالحين وخدمة أبي عبد الله الحسين ومن مات من هذا الجمع، إلى أرواحهم جميعا نهدي ثواب المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها الصلوات.